How do you even begin to wrap your head around a century of just massive change? Well, sometimes the best way in is to look at it through one person's eyes. And that's exactly what we're going to do today. We're going to explore the wild ride of the 20th century all through the life of one remarkable woman, Helen Kolk.
So that's the big question, right? How can one single life, with all its personal joys and heartbreaks, really reflect the giant world-shaping events of an entire century? It seems almost impossible, but let's dive in and see.
Okay, so our guide through all this is Helen Antoinette Kolk. She entered the world right at the height of the Roaring '20s. You know, jazz, flappers, all that excitement and prosperity. But her childhood, and really her entire life, was about to be shaped by the firestorm that was coming next. I mean, it's pretty incredible when you look at it. Her life lines up almost perfectly with some of the most chaotic, world-changing decades we've ever seen. We're talking the Great Depression shaping her childhood, then boom, World War II. And after that, the post-war boom and the huge cultural shifts of the 50s and 60s. So yeah, this is basically our map for the journey.
All right, let's start at the beginning with her childhood. And wow, what a childhood. It was a time defined not by one, but by two of the biggest crises of the entire century. This is the moment where her personal, individual story collides head-on with global history. First up, the Great Depression. You gotta remember, Helen was just a little kid, a toddler, when the stock market crashed in '29. That event threw her family, and pretty much the whole country, into a decade of real hardship. And this wasn't some far-off news story for them. No way. It was the reality they woke up to every single day. It was the air they breathed.
And this is where it gets so real. We found this one little detail in a census record that says her family was living in a home located above a store. Just think about that for a second. Can't you just picture it? A family doing whatever they can to get by, with the whole city buzzing right below them. It's that one tiny detail that makes a massive historical event feel so incredibly personal.
Her early life was definitely a whirlwind. They moved to a new city. She became the oldest sister to 3 younger siblings. But in the middle of all that chaos, her family was hit with this profound personal tragedy. They lost her infant brother, Joseph. And it's such a tough reminder, isn't it? That even when the whole world is in crisis, these deeply personal heartbreaks don't just stop. They keep happening. So, just when it seemed like the country was finally starting to pull itself out of the Depression, it gets slammed right into another global catastrophe. Helen grew up during World War II. That means her entire experience as a teenager, all the hopes, the dreams, the drama, it all happened with the backdrop of a nation at war.
I mean, just try to imagine being a teenager then. Your everyday life is filled with news from Europe and the Pacific. You're using ration stamps just to get sugar or gasoline. You're getting involved in all these patriotic drives. There was this incredible sense of national unity for sure, but underneath it all, a deep, constant feeling of anxiety. Just always there.
But then, after all those years of hardship and war, peace. And with it, this huge wave of optimism just washed over the country. For Helen's generation, this must have felt like the first real shot at building a better future. And for them, that future was all about 2 things: education and family.
So for Helen, what did this new era of opportunity look like? Well, it meant going to college. She enrolled at Kent State University right after the war, and that decision placed her smack in the middle of a massive change happening in America.
And you have to understand, college campuses back then were completely different from what they were before. Why? The GI Bill. It totally changed the game. So Helen wasn't just surrounded by other 18-year-olds. Her classes were filled with millions of returning veterans. Can you just imagine the discussions in those classrooms? Learning alongside these guys who had seen the world, who brought this incredible maturity and life experience that was just brand new to a university setting.
Then came the next chapter. In 1953, she married Stephen Thomas Randolph, and they started a family right at the peak of the baby boom. She had 2 sons, one in '59 and another in '60, and she raised them in that quintessential post-war America. You know, the era of sprawling suburbs, new highways, and a culture that was all about the family.
So we enter the 1960s, a decade of huge cultural revolution in America. But for Helen, the 60s would be defined by something else entirely.
a quiet, intensely personal battle. And it was a fight she had to face in a time that was very, very different from our own. The year is 1967, and Helen gets the news. She's diagnosed with breast cancer, and just like that, her life changed forever. Now, to really get what she was up against, you have to understand the times. In the 1960s, cancer, well, it was often a hidden illness, something people only whispered about if they talked about it at all. All the things we take for granted today, the public conversations, the support groups, the awareness campaigns, none of that was there. It just didn't exist yet. In that culture of silence, it must have made the whole thing feel incredibly isolating. Just think about it. Here she is, trying to raise two young boys while fighting this absolutely devastating disease, and doing it mostly on her own, without the kind of community support we now know is so critical. Her illness moved fast. Just 5 years after that diagnosis, on August 30th, 1972, she passed away. Helen was only 45. So, when you look back at a life that saw so much history but was cut so tragically short, what's the takeaway? What's her legacy? What does her story really tell us? Well, I think it's that beyond all the big historical events, her life was really about these simple, fundamental human roles. You know, daughter, sister, student, wife. These are the things that forge a real legacy. But more than anything else, she was a mother. Ultimately, her story isn't just about the crazy times she lived through, but about how she lived through them. It comes down to this one powerful idea. She left behind a legacy of love for the son she raised. That's what endured. And that really brings us full circle, back to the beginning. Helen's life truly was a mirror of her times. And it makes you wonder, right? If you laid out your own life's timeline and set it against the backdrop of the history you've lived through, what story would it tell?